The voice drifted across the prairie like something from a dream, soft and melodic, and Ethan Emerson nearly dropped the fence post he'd been carrying when he realized it was coming from the direction of his cattle herd. He set down his tools and moved quietly through the tall grass, following the sound of a woman's voice singing an old hymn he remembered from childhood. The September sun beat down on his shoulders as he crested a small rise, and there she was, standing in the middle of his Hereford cattle like she'd been born among them. She was thin, her dress torn and dusty, her dark hair hanging loose down her back, but she stood straight and tall, one hand resting on the flank of his biggest bull like they were old friends. The bull, temperamental creature that he was, stood perfectly still, his eyes half closed as the woman sang. The rest of the herd had gathered around her in a loose circle, and Ethan counted at least 30 head all standing there peacefully, listening to this stranger's song. He must have made some sound because she turned then, her eyes meeting his across the distance. Even from where he stood, he could see they were an unusual shade of green, bright against her sun-darkened skin. She didn't scream or startle, just kept singing until she reached the end of her verse, then let the last note fade into the afternoon air. "I hope you don't mind," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. They seemed to like it. Ethan walked closer, moving slowly so as not to spook the cattle. Now that he was nearer, he could see the exhaustion in the lines of her face, the slight tremor in her hands. "How long have you been out here?" "4 days, I think." She swayed slightly, and he reached out instinctively to steady her, but she caught herself. "Maybe 5. I stopped counting after the 3rd night." 4 days. He looked her over more carefully now, seeing the worn soles of her boots, the sunburn on her nose and cheeks, the way her dress hung on her frame. "You've been lost for 4 days, and you're standing here singing to my cattle." A small smile touched her lips. Panicking seemed like it would take too much energy. The singing helped me stay calm, and I figured if there were cattle, there had to be a rancher somewhere nearby. "You figured right." He pulled off his hat and wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "I'm Ethan Emerson. This is my ranch about 6 miles south of Jefferson, Texas." "Texas?" Her eyes widened. "I thought I was still in Louisiana." "You walked pretty far then. Louisiana borders a good 40 miles east of here." He studied her face, trying to judge if she was strong enough to make it back to the house. "What's your name?" "Violet Vaughn." She turned back to the bull and patted his side gently. "Thank you for listening, old fellow." The bull snorted softly, and Violet stepped away from him with the same careful grace she'd shown throughout their conversation. Ethan noticed the way she moved, conserving her energy, keeping her breathing steady despite what must have been days of hunger and thirst. "Can you walk?" he asked. "The house is about 2 miles from here. I can walk." She said it with such certainty that he believed her, but he also saw the way her hands shook when she smoothed down her skirt, "or I could ride back and bring the wagon." "I can walk," she repeated, and started moving in the direction he'd pointed, her chin lifted with determination. Ethan fell into step beside her, shortening his stride to match hers. The September heat shimmered across the grassland, and he could hear the distant lowing of the cattle behind them. He kept glancing at her, marveling at the way she kept going, one foot in front of the other, never complaining, never asking for help. "So what happened?" he asked after they'd covered about half a mile. "How'd you end up lost out here?" Violet was quiet for a moment, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I was traveling with a wagon train. We were headed for California. About a week ago, one of the other women said she'd seen some wild berries growing in a ravine off the main trail. We went to pick them." She paused, taking a careful breath. "There was a rock slide, not a big one but enough. When the dust cleared, I couldn't find my way back. I called for hours, but they must not have heard me. By the time I climbed out of the ravine, the wagon train was gone. They left without you. I'm sure they looked for a while, but a wagon train can't wait forever. Too many people depending on it to keep moving. There was no bitterness in her voice, just acceptance. I tried to follow their tracks, but the wind came up that first night and covered everything. So I picked a direction and started walking. Why didn't you stay put? Wait for someone to find you, she looked at him then, and he saw the steel beneath her exhaustion. Because sitting still and hoping for rescue is how people die out here. I'd rather die trying to save myself than sitting in one spot waiting for help that might never come. Ethan found himself smiling. That's a hell of an attitude. It's the only one that makes sense. She stumbled slightly over a prairie dog hole, and this time she did accept his steadying hand. Her fingers were rough with calluses, the hands of someone used to work. Thank you. They walked on in silence for a while. The house came into view over the next rise, a sturdy two-story structure his father had built 20 years ago, back in 1859, before the war that had changed everything. Ethan had been just a boy then, but he remembered helping to set the foundation stones, remembered his mother planting roses by the front porch. It's a beautiful home, Violet said softly. My father built it. He wanted something that would last. Ethan heard the catch in his own voice. He died 2 years ago. Heart gave out one day while he was checking the fence line. I'm sorry. He had a good life. Loved this land, loved my mother. They were close enough now that he could see his housekeeper, Rosa, hanging laundry in the side yard. My mother passed when I was 18. Fever took her one winter. How old are you now? Violet asked. 26. Been running the ranch on my own since my father died. He waved to Rosa, who had spotted them and was already hurrying toward the house. Rosa will get you fixed up. She's been with our family since before I was born. Rosa met them at the porch, her round face creased with concern. She was in her 50s, her dark hair streaked with gray, and she took one look at Violet and immediately switched into the take-charge manner Ethan had known his whole life. Blessed Mary, this girl needs water and food and a bath in that order. Rosa took Violet's arm gently. Come inside, child. Let's get you taken care of. Violet looked back at Ethan. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for not letting my cattle stampede, he said, and was rewarded with another of those small smiles. Rosa led Violet inside, and Ethan stood on the porch for a moment, listening to Rosa's stream of Spanish and English as she fussed over their unexpected guest. He should get back to the fence line, finish the work he'd started that morning, but his feet didn't seem to want to move. There was something about Violet Vaughn that had gotten under his skin in the space of a single conversation. The way she'd stood there among his cattle, singing like she didn't have a care in the world despite being lost and alone for days. The quiet strength in her voice when she talked about choosing action over waiting. The steel in her spine that kept her walking even when she was clearly exhausted. He'd met plenty of women in his life, had even courted a few in town, but none of them had ever affected him quite like this. She's sleeping already, Rosa said, appearing beside him so quietly he jumped. Poor thing fell asleep in the bathtub. I got her cleaned up and into one of your mother's old nightgowns and put her to bed. She didn't even wake when I moved her. She was out there for 4 or 5 days, Ethan said. Lost from a wagon train. Rosa shook her head. That wagon master should be shot, leaving someone behind like that. She said they probably looked for her. Can't blame them too much for not finding her if there was a rockslide involved. He turned to look at Rosa. What do you think of her? I think she's got grit, surviving out there alone like that. Rosa gave him a knowing look. I also think you're standing here staring at the door instead of finishing your work. Ethan felt heat rise in his face. I was just making sure she got settled. Sure you were. Rosa patted his arm. Go on, do your work. I'll keep an eye on her. She'll probably sleep through until tomorrow. Ethan did go back to his work, but he found his mind wandering throughout the afternoon. He kept thinking about Violet standing there among his cattle, her hand resting on that bull's flank like it was the most natural thing in the world. Most people were afraid of cattle, especially the bulls, but she'd seemed completely at ease. He finished the fence repairs as the sun was setting, painting the western sky in shades of orange and red. When he got back to the house, Rosa had dinner ready, beef stew with fresh bread, and he ate at the kitchen table while she told him about Violet's condition. She's got some bad blisters on her feet, and she's too thin, but nothing that won't heal with rest and food, Rosa said. Her hands are rough, though. She's used to hard work. She said she was traveling with a wagon train, headed to California. Rosa snorted. Foolishness. All these people heading west looking for gold or land or whatever they think is out there. Half of them don't survive the journey. She survived being lost alone for 4 days. That's more than most could manage. True enough. Rosa studied him across the table. You like her? It wasn't a question, but Ethan answered anyway. I just met her, Rosa. I've known you since you were a baby, Ethan Emerson. I can read you like one of those books your mother used to love. She stood and started clearing the dishes. There's nothing wrong with liking her. She seems like a good woman, strong. You need someone strong if you're going to make a life out here. Ethan went to bed that night thinking about Violet's green eyes and the sound of her voice singing to his cattle. He wondered what had made her join a wagon train heading west, wondered if she had family waiting for her in California, wondered what she would do now that she'd been separated from the train. He woke early the next morning, as he always did, and was having coffee in the kitchen when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Violet appeared in the doorway, wearing one of his mother's old dresses that Rosa must have found for her. It was a bit loose, but the blue fabric brought out the color of her eyes. Good morning, she said. I hope you don't mind me borrowing this. Rosa said it would be all right. It's fine. My mother would have been happy to see someone getting use out of her clothes. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Are you hungry? Starving? She sat down carefully, and he could see the stiffness in her movements. Everything hurts this morning. That'll happen after walking for 4 days. He poured her a cup of coffee. Rosa's already out feeding the chickens, but she left biscuits and preserves. Violet ate 3 biscuits in quick succession, trying to maintain some semblance of manners but clearly ravenous. Ethan found himself enjoying watching her, the way she closed her eyes in appreciation after each bite, the small sound of contentment she made when she tasted the strawberry preserves. These are delicious, she said. Did Rosa make them? She did. She puts up preserves every summer, more than we could ever eat. She gives jars to everyone in town. He refilled her coffee cup. How are you feeling? Besides sore, grateful to be alive, grateful to have found your cattle. She looked at him over the rim of her cup. I really was lost. I know it must have seemed strange, me just standing there singing, but I'd been walking for days, and when I saw your herd, I just felt so relieved. And then when I got close, they seemed skittish, so I started singing to calm them down. It worked. I've never seen them that peaceful with a stranger before. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind all night. What will you do now? Try to catch up with the wagon train? Violet was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. I've been thinking about that. The wagon train is probably a week ahead by now, maybe more. Even if I could catch up, I'm not sure I want to. After being left behind like that, I don't know if I trust them to get me safely to California. What's in California for you, my cousin? She married a man who went west during the gold rush. They have a farm in the Sacramento Valley now. She wrote and said if I ever wanted to come west, I'd have a place with them. Violet traced the rim of her cup with one finger, but I don't know them very well. We were close as children, but that was years ago. I was going more because I didn't have anywhere else to go than because I really wanted to be there. Where are you from originally, Georgia? My parents had a farm outside Atlanta. They both died when I was 20. Influenza. Her voice was steady, but he could see the old pain in her eyes. I tried to keep the farm going, but I couldn't do it alone. Eventually, I had to sell. I've been working as a teacher and seamstress for the last year, living with another teacher in Atlanta, but she got married and her husband didn't want to board her. That's when I decided to go to California. Ethan did the math in his head. How old are you now? 22. I'll be 23 in November. She met his eyes. Why do you ask? Just curious. He stood and brought the coffee pot to the table, refilling both their cups. I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? Stay here for a while. At least until you're fully recovered and have had time to decide what you want to do. Rosa could use some help around the house, and I could use an extra pair of hands with the cattle if you're interested. I'll pay you fair wages, give you room and board. No obligations beyond that. When you're ready to move on, you can. Violet studied him carefully. Why would you do that for a stranger? Because you survived 4 days alone on the prairie and came through it with your wits intact. Because you stood in the middle of my cattle herd and sang to them instead of panicking. Because I think you deserve a chance to figure out what you want without having to rush into another bad situation. He leaned back in his chair. And because I meant what I said about Rosa needing help. She's not as young as she used to be, and this house is big. My father built it planning for a big family, but that never happened. What about your reputation? A young woman staying in your house. Rosa's here. That's chaperone enough for the gossips in town. And honestly, most people around here are too busy trying to survive to worry much about who's living where. Violet was quiet, turning her cup between her hands. I appreciate the offer, I really do, but I don't want charity. It's not charity, it's a job. If you don't work, you don't get paid. He smiled. But I warn you, Rosa's a taskmaster. She'll have you earning every penny. That got a real smile from Violet, the first full one he'd seen, and it transformed her face. All right, I'll stay, at least for a while. Good. Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. Rosa came back in then, saw them sitting together at the table and raised her eyebrows but didn't comment. So you're awake. Good. How are those feet? Sore, but I'll live. Violet stood. Ethan offered me work here, helping you with the house and him with the cattle. I accepted. Rosa looked between them, then nodded approvingly. Welcome to the household then, Violet Vaughn. Now sit back down and let me look at those blisters properly. The next few days fell into a routine. Violet helped Rosa with the cooking and cleaning, and in the afternoons when it was cooler, Ethan showed her around the ranch. She had a natural way with the animals, gentle but confident, and the cattle responded to her presence like they'd known her all their lives. You're good with them, Ethan said one afternoon as they watched the herd grazing near the creek that ran through the eastern section of his land. Where'd you learn that? My father had dairy cows. I grew up helping him with them. She leaned against the fence rail. I always liked animals better than people. They're more honest about what they want. Can't argue with that. He watched her profile, the way the afternoon sun caught in her dark hair. Do you miss Georgia? Sometimes. I miss the oak trees and the way spring comes early there. I miss my parents, even though they've been gone for years. She turned to look at him. But I don't miss the war. Do you remember the war? I was young, but yes. My father didn't fight. He was too old and someone had to keep the ranch running. But I remember the soldiers passing through, remember the fear. He paused. Things were hard after, still are in some ways. Everything changed, Violet said softly. The world I grew up in doesn't exist anymore. Sometimes I think that's why so many people are heading west. They're trying to find something new because the old things are gone. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the cattle. Ethan found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did anymore. Since his father's death, he'd been carrying the weight of the ranch alone, making every decision, solving every problem. Having Violet here, talking to her like this, felt like a gift he hadn't known he needed. "Tell me about the ranch," Violet said. "How long has your family had it?" "My grandfather claimed this land in 1845. He was one of the first settlers in this area after Texas became a state. Built a small cabin, started with about a dozen head of cattle. My father expanded it, bought more land, increased the herd. Now I've got about 300 head and 2,000 acres. He felt the pride in his voice. "It's not the biggest ranch in East Texas, but it's ours, free and clear. My father made sure to pay off all the debts before he died. 300 cattle. That's a lot for one person to manage. I've got some help. There's 2 ranch hands who come during calving season and roundup, but most of the year it's just me and Rosa." He looked at her. "And now you." Over the following weeks, Violet became part of the rhythm of the ranch. She helped Rosa with the endless work of running a household, taught herself to make cheese from the milk of their dairy cows, mended fences alongside Ethan, and sang to the cattle every afternoon. The herd seemed to know her now, would cluster around her when she appeared, calm and peaceful under her voice. Ethan found himself looking for excuses to be near her, to hear her laugh or see the way her eyes lit up when she talked about something she was passionate about. He'd never felt this way before, this constant awareness of another person, this need to be in her presence. One evening in late October, after dinner, they sat on the front porch watching the sunset. Rosa had gone to visit her sister in town and wouldn't be back until the next day, leaving Ethan and Violet alone for the first time since she'd arrived. "It's been 6 weeks, Violet said quietly. 6 weeks since I got lost. You regret staying?" She turned to look at him, and in the fading light her eyes seemed impossibly green. "No, this has been the happiest I've been in a long time, maybe ever. Happier than you would have been in California, much happier," she smiled. "Your cattle are much better company than my cousin would have been," Ethan laughed. "Glad to hear it," he sobered. "Violet, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I've been thinking about this for weeks now, trying to figure out the right way to say it." He took a breath. "I don't want you to feel pressured. You work for me, and I know that creates an imbalance, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel." Violet's expression was unreadable. "What do you feel?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words came out in a rush. "Maybe I started falling that first day when I saw you standing with my cattle. I don't know, but I know that when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is seeing you. I know that the best part of my day is when we're working side by side. I know that I want you to stay here, not as an employee but as something more." Violet was quiet for so long that Ethan's heart started to sink. Then she reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I fell in love with you too," she said softly. "I think it was the moment you offered me work instead of charity. Or maybe it was watching you with your cattle, the way you care for them. Or maybe it was the way you talk about your parents, the love in your voice." She squeezed his hand. "I kept telling myself it was foolish, that I'd only known you a few weeks, that I was just grateful to you for saving me. But it's more than that. It's so much more." Ethan felt like his heart might burst out of his chest. "So what do we do about it?" "I don't know. This isn't exactly how I imagined falling in love." She laughed, and it was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. "Lost on the prairie, found by a rancher falling for him while singing to his cattle. It sounds like something out of a penny dreadful. The best stories usually do." He stood and pulled her to her feet, then cupped her face in his hands. "Can I kiss you? I'd be disappointed if you didn't." He kissed her there on the porch as the sun set over his land, and it felt like everything in his life had been leading to this moment. She tasted like the honey from their bees and the coffee they'd shared that morning, and when she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, he knew he'd found something worth more than all the cattle and land in Texas. They stood there for a long time, holding each other as the stars came out overhead. Finally, Violet pulled back slightly. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now I court you properly. Take you to church on Sunday, let everyone in Jefferson meet you. Ask your permission to hold your hand and steal kisses when Rosa's not looking." He grinned. "And then, if you're willing, I ask you to marry me. That's quite a plan. I'm a planner." He kissed her forehead. "But only if it's what you want. I meant what I said before, no pressure. If you need time, we have time." Violet looked up at him, her eyes serious. "I lost my parents, I lost my home. I got lost on the prairie and thought I might die out there. But all of that led me here to you. I don't need time, Ethan. I know what I want." "What do you want?" "I want you. I want this life. I want to stay here and sing to your cattle and help Rosa in the kitchen and wake up every morning knowing I'm home." She smiled. "I want to marry you, Ethan Emerson. That was supposed to be my line." "Then say it." He got down on one knee right there on the porch, still holding her hand. "Violet Vaughn, will you marry me?" "Yes." She pulled him to his feet and kissed him again. "Yes, yes, yes." They told Rosa the next day when she returned from town, and she pretended to be surprised even though Ethan could tell she'd seen this coming from the moment Violet arrived. "About time," Rosa said, pulling Violet into a hug. "I was wondering how long you two would dance around each other." "It's only been 6 weeks," Ethan protested. "And in those 6 weeks, you've been making moon eyes at each other like teenagers. I'm just glad you finally did something about it." She released Violet and turned to Ethan. "Your mother would have loved her." "I know," Ethan said softly. "I wish she could have met her." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Jefferson, with Rosa and half the town in attendance. Violet wore a dress that had been his mother's, carefully altered by Rosa to fit her. When she walked down the aisle toward him, Ethan felt tears prick his eyes. The preacher kept the ceremony short and simple. "Do you, Ethan Emerson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Violet Vaughn, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the state of Texas, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Ethan did, to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered. When they finally broke apart, both of them laughing, he whispered, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Emerson?" "I've been home since the day I found your cattle," she whispered back. They had a small reception at the ranch, with food that Rosa and some of the neighbor women had prepared. It was nothing fancy, just good food and good company, but Ethan couldn't remember ever being happier. As the sun set and their guests started to leave, Ethan and Violet stood together on the porch, her hand in his, watching the last wagon disappear down the road. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I ever thought possible." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thank you for finding me that day." "Thank you for being lost." She laughed and turned to face him. "That's a terrible thing to say." "Maybe. But if you hadn't gotten lost, you wouldn't have found my cattle, and if you hadn't found my cattle, I wouldn't have found you." He wrapped his arms around her waist. "Sometimes the best things in life come from the worst situations." "I suppose that's true." She reached up and touched his face. "I love you, Ethan Emerson." "I love you too, Violet Emerson." They went inside together, leaving the door open to the warm November evening. Somewhere in the distance, Ethan could hear his cattle lowing, settling down for the night. His cattle, his land, his home. And now, his wife. That first year of marriage was everything Ethan had hoped for and more. Violet threw herself into ranch life with the same determination she'd shown when she was lost on the prairie. She expanded Rosa's kitchen garden, started raising chickens for eggs and meat, and continued her afternoon ritual of singing to the cattle. "They give more milk when they are calm," she explained to Ethan one day. "And the calves are healthier. Your father was smart to treat them well, but a little music never hurt anyone." The ranch prospered under their joint care. Ethan found that having a partner to share the work and the decisions made everything easier. Violet had a sharp mind for business and wasn't afraid to share her opinions. "We should expand the herd," she said one evening over dinner. It was January 1880 now, cold enough that they ate in the kitchen near the stove rather than in the formal dining room. "We have the land for it, and the market for beef is only going to get better as more people move west." "That would mean hiring more help," Ethan said. "I'm not sure I want to take on the expense." "The expense will pay for itself within 2 years if we do it right." Violet pulled out a piece of paper covered in her neat handwriting. "Look, I've been keeping track of our costs and income. If we buy another 100 head in the spring, hire 2 full-time ranch hands instead of seasonal help, we could double our profits by 1882. Ethan looked over her figures, impressed despite himself. "Where'd you learn to do this kind of calculation?" "My father taught me. He said a woman needed to understand money just as much as a man, maybe more, because she'd have less opportunity to earn it." She smiled. "What do you think?" "I think you're brilliant." He pulled her into his lap. "And I think we should do it." They bought the additional cattle that spring, Herefords like the rest of the herd, and hired 2 young men from town, brothers named James and Thomas Crawford. The Crawford brothers were hard workers, respectful and reliable, and they took well to Violet's unorthodox method of managing the cattle. "Madam, I have to say, I've never seen cattle so calm," James said one afternoon after watching Violet sing to them. "My pa's got a ranch south of here and his cattle are mean as rattlesnakes." "They respond to kindness," Violet said, "just like people do." By the fall of 1880, it was clear that Violet's predictions about the ranch's profits had been conservative. They made enough money to not only pay the Crawford brothers good wages, but also to start saving for future expansion. "You should be the one running this place," Ethan said one night as they lay in bed. "You're better at it than I am." "We run it together," Violet said firmly. "That's the whole point. You know the land and the cattle, I know the numbers and the business side. Together we're stronger than either of us would be alone." In December, Violet told him she was pregnant. "Are you sure?" Ethan asked, his hand going automatically to her still flat stomach. "I'm sure. Rosa's sure too. She's been through this enough times with other women to know the signs." Violet's eyes were bright. "We're going to have a baby, Ethan." He kissed her, overwhelmed with joy and fear in equal measure. "When?" "Late June or early July, near as we can figure." The winter seemed to drag on forever after that. Ethan found himself constantly worrying about Violet, hovering over her until she finally told him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she said, laughing at his concerned expression. "I'm healthy and strong. Everything will be fine." But he couldn't stop worrying, especially when he thought about his own mother dying so young. He'd been 18 when she passed, old enough to help his father through the grief, but he still remembered the pain of losing her. What if something goes wrong? He asked Rosa one day when Violet was out of earshot. "Then we deal with it," Rosa said practically. "But worrying about it won't change anything. All you can do is take care of her and pray." Violet stayed active throughout her pregnancy, refusing to be coddled. She still helped in the garden, still sang to the cattle, though Ethan insisted she stop riding horseback after her 4th month. "I feel fine," she protested. "I don't care, I'm not taking any chances." He kissed her to soften the words. "Humor me." Their son was born on a hot July night in 1881, after a labor that lasted nearly 15 hours. Ethan paced the porch while Rosa and the doctor from Jefferson attended to Violet inside. He could hear her crying out, and each sound felt like a knife to his heart. Finally, just as dawn was breaking, he heard a new sound, the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. Rosa appeared at the door, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son, and Violet's fine. She's tired but fine." Ethan rushed inside to find Violet propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted, holding a red-faced bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up when he entered, and her smile was radiant. "Come meet your son," she said softly. He crossed to the bed and looked down at the baby in her arms. He was small and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered. "He has your chin." Violet touched the baby's face gently. "What should we name him?" They discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Ethan knew exactly what he wanted to call him. "Samuel, after my father. Samuel Emerson." Violet tested the name. "I like it." Samuel proved to be a healthy, happy baby. He grew quickly, hitting all his milestones early, and by the time he was 6 months old, he was already trying to pull himself up to standing. "He's going to be walking before his 1st birthday," Rosa predicted. "Mark my words." She was right. Samuel took his first steps at 10 months, tottering across the kitchen floor into Violet's waiting arms. Ethan happened to be there to see it, and he felt his chest swell with pride. "That's my boy," he said, scooping Samuel up and tossing him in the air. Samuel shrieked with laughter, his dark eyes sparkling. The ranch continued to prosper. The expansion Violet had planned worked even better than she'd projected, and by 1883 they had nearly 500 head of cattle and had bought an additional 1,000 acres to the north. "We're doing well," Ethan said one evening as they sat on the porch watching Samuel play in the yard. He was 2 now, running and talking and getting into everything. "Better than I ever dreamed." "We are," Violet agreed. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I want to tell you something." "What is it?" "I'm pregnant again." Ethan felt the same rush of joy and fear he'd felt the first time. "When?" "March, I think." Their second child, a daughter they named Emma Rose after both their mothers, was born on a cold March night in 1884. The labor was shorter this time, and when Ethan was finally allowed into the room, he found Violet sitting up in bed looking tired but triumphant, holding a tiny baby girl with wisps of red gold hair. "She has your mother's coloring," Violet said. "I hope that's all right." "It's more than all right." Ethan sat on the edge of the bed and put his arm around both of them. "She's beautiful. You're beautiful. I'm the luckiest man in Texas." Samuel, who had been staying with Rosa's sister in town during the birth, was brought home the next day. He was fascinated by his new sister, wanted to touch her constantly with his grubby little hands. "Gentle," Violet reminded him over and over. "You have to be gentle with the baby." "Baby," Samuel repeated solemnly, patting Emma's head with surprising care. The years that followed were full and busy. The ranch demanded constant attention, the children needed care and supervision, and there was always more work than hours in the day. But Ethan had never been happier. He loved watching Violet with their children, the patience she showed them, the songs she sang. He loved coming in from a long day of work to find her waiting for him, Samuel and Emma playing at her feet. He loved lying in bed at night, her head on his shoulder, talking about their plans for the future. "You ever think about that day?" Violet asked him one night. It was 1886 now. Samuel was 5 and Emma was 2, and they just put both children to bed after a long day. "What day?" "The day you found me. Do you ever think about how different things might have been if you'd ridden out to check the cattle an hour later, or if I'd walked in a different direction?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted, "but I try not to. It makes me feel strange, like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, looking at all the ways my life could have gone wrong. I think about it a lot." Violet turned to face him in the darkness. "I think about how I was so angry when I got separated from the wagon train. How I spent the first day crying and cursing my luck. But now I'm grateful for it. If I hadn't gotten lost, I wouldn't have found you. I wouldn't have Samuel and Emma. I wouldn't have this life. You think you would have been unhappy in California? I don't think I would have been truly happy anywhere else." She kissed him softly. "This is where I was meant to be. With you." In 1887, Violet started a small school in one of the unused outbuildings on the ranch. There were enough children in the area now that they needed one, and Violet missed teaching. "Are you sure you have time for this?" Ethan asked. "Between the children and the ranch work, I'll make time. Education is important, Ethan. These children deserve a chance to learn." She started with just 6 students, including Samuel, but within a year, she had 15. The parents paid what they could, some in cash, some in trade, and Violet never turned anyone away. "Learning shouldn't depend on how much money you have," she told Ethan firmly when he suggested she might want to set a standard tuition. Ethan loved watching her teach, the way she brought history and literature to life for her students, the way she encouraged them to ask questions and think for themselves. She was a natural teacher, patient but demanding, and her students adored her. In 1888, when Emma was 4 and Samuel was 7, Violet told Ethan she was pregnant again. "I thought we were done," Ethan said, but he was smiling, "So did I." Violet laughed. But apparently, God had other plans. Their third child, another son they named Daniel, was born in December 1888. He was a fussy baby, unlike his siblings, and he kept them up many nights that first year. But he was also affectionate and sweet, and by the time he was walking, he'd become the most loving of all their children. "He's always hugging someone," Rosa observed. "That boy has enough love in him for the whole county." The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By 1890, they had over 700 head of cattle, employed 5 full-time ranch hands, and owned close to 4,000 acres. They'd also expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper study for Violet to do her bookkeeping. "We've come a long way from that first day," Ethan said one afternoon. They were standing on the porch watching the children play in the yard. Samuel was 9 now, teaching Emma and Daniel how to rope a fence post. "We have." Violet slipped her hand into his. "Sometimes I can't believe this is my life, that I'm this happy. Do you ever miss your old life, Georgia, or what you thought California would be?" "Never." She turned to look at him. "This is better than anything I could have imagined." In 1891, Samuel started helping seriously with the cattle work. At 10 years old, he was already showing signs of becoming a good rancher, patient with the animals, hard-working, responsible beyond his years. "He reminds me of my father," Ethan told Violet. "The way he is with the cattle." "He reminds me of you," Violet said. Samuel had inherited his mother's gift with the cattle, too. He'd started singing to them, like Violet did, and they responded to him the same way they responded to her. "You're raising them right," James Crawford told Ethan one day. "All 3 of your children are good kids." "That's their mother's doing," Ethan said. "She's the one who keeps them in line." But that wasn't entirely true. Ethan was deeply involved in his children's lives, teaching them about the land and the cattle, reading to them at night, playing with them whenever he had time. He was determined to give them the kind of childhood he'd had, full of love and stability, and the knowledge that they were cherished. In 1893, Violet closed her school. Emma was 9 now and didn't need her mother home as much, but Violet said she was tired of the constant demands. "I want to spend more time with you and the children," she told Ethan. "The school was good while it lasted, but I'm ready to move on." She didn't stay idle long. She started breeding horses, a project she'd been thinking about for years, and soon had a small herd of quality stock that sold well. "You can't stand to not be busy, can you?" Ethan teased. "I get bored easily," she grinned at him. "You knew that when you married me." In 1895, Emma started showing an interest in music. Violet bought her a piano, shipped all the way from New Orleans, and hired a teacher from Jefferson to give her lessons once a week. "She has a real gift," the teacher told them. "With proper training, she could be quite accomplished." Emma practiced for hours every day, filling the house with music. Daniel liked to sit under the piano while she played, and Samuel would sometimes sing along. Ethan loved those evenings, the whole family together, the house full of sound and warmth. In 1898, when Samuel turned 17, he told his parents he wanted to go to college. "I love the ranch," he said, "and I want to come back and help run it. But I also want to learn about modern ranching techniques, about business and animal husbandry. There's a new agricultural college in College Station. I want to go there." Ethan's first instinct was to say no, to keep his son home where he belonged, but Violet gave him a look that said he needed to let Samuel go. "If that's what you want, we'll make it happen," Ethan said finally. "But you have to promise to come home for the summers." "I promise." Samuel left for college that fall, and the house felt empty without him. But he kept his promise, coming home every summer to work on the ranch, and the education he was getting proved valuable. He came back with new ideas about cattle breeding, crop rotation, and land management. "He's going to take this ranch to places I never dreamed of," Ethan told Violet. In 1900, the new century arrived with celebration and hope. The children were all growing up. Samuel was 19 and finishing his education. Emma was 16 and beautiful and breaking hearts all over Jefferson. And Daniel was 11 and already showing signs of becoming as good a rancher as his older brother. "I can't believe we've been married 20 years, Violet said on their anniversary. They'd left the children with Rosa and gone for a ride out to the creek where they'd stood together so many times over the years. "Best 20 years of my life," Ethan said. He dismounted and helped her down, then pulled her into his arms. "I love you just as much now as I did that first night on the porch, more maybe." "I love you too." She rested her head against his chest. "Thank you for finding me that day. Thank you for singing to my cattle." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, listening to the sound of the creek and the distant lowing of the cattle. Ethan thought about that day 20 years ago when he'd heard a woman's voice singing across the prairie, thought about how close he'd come to never meeting her, and felt a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly knocked him over. "What are you thinking about?" Violet asked. "How lucky I am." "How blessed." He kissed the top of her head. "How glad I am that you got lost. Best thing that ever happened to me, getting lost that day. Samuel graduated from college in 1901 and came home to stay. He took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, implementing the new techniques he'd learned, and within a year their profits had increased by 30%. "Your son is a genius," Violet told Ethan. "Our son," Ethan corrected, "and he learned from the best." In 1902, Emma married a young lawyer from Jefferson named William Foster. It was a beautiful wedding, held at the ranch under the oak trees Ethan's grandfather had planted 50 years ago. Violet cried through the whole ceremony, and Ethan had to fight back his own tears as he walked his daughter down the makeshift aisle. "She'll be close," Violet said afterward. "They're building a house in Jefferson. We'll see her all the time." But it wasn't the same, and they both knew it. The house felt emptier with Emma gone, even though Samuel and Daniel were still there. In 1903, Samuel met a woman at church named Margaret Taylor. She was the daughter of a rancher from the next county over, and Samuel was smitten from the first moment he saw her. "She's smart and funny, and she knows cattle," Samuel told his parents. "She grew up on a ranch just like this one." Samuel and Margaret were married in the spring of 1904, and she moved into the house with them. Violet worried about how it would be, having another woman in her home, but Margaret was easy to love. She was kind and capable, and she clearly adored Samuel. "I'm so glad he found someone good," Violet told Ethan. "Someone who will be a true partner to him." In 1905, Emma gave birth to Ethan and Violet's first grandchild, a little girl named Lily. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Ethan felt his heart expand in a way he hadn't thought possible. "I can't believe I'm a grandmother," Violet said, watching as Emma nursed the baby. "I don't feel old enough." "You're not old. You're perfect." Ethan put his arm around her. "And our daughter is perfect, and our granddaughter is perfect." In 1906, Margaret gave birth to Samuel and Margaret's first child, a boy they named Ethan after his grandfather. Now there were 2 babies in and around the house, and the place rang with the sound of crying and laughter. "This is what your father wanted when he built this house," Rosa said. She was in her 70s now, moving slower but still insisting on doing her share of the work. "He wanted it full of family." Daniel, now 17, announced that he wanted to be a veterinarian. "I love the animals," he said. "I want to help take care of them properly, learn about diseases and treatments." "Another college man," Ethan said, but he was proud. All 3 of his children were pursuing their passions, building good lives. Daniel left for veterinary school in the fall of 1906. And for the first time in years, it was just Ethan and Violet in the house, along with Samuel and Margaret and the baby. "The nest is getting empty," Violet said one night. "But it's still full too. Samuel and Margaret are here. We have grandchildren. Emma visits all the time." Ethan pulled her close. "And I still have you." In 1908, Violet turned 50. They threw a big party at the ranch with everyone they knew invited. Emma came with William and Lily, now 3 years old. Daniel came home from school. Samuel and Margaret were there with little Ethan, now 2, and their new baby daughter, Rose. 50 years, Violet said during the party, standing up to thank everyone for coming. "I've lived 50 years, and I can honestly say that the best of them have been the ones I've spent here with all of you. 28 years ago, I was lost on the prairie, sure I was going to die. But I found this man," she gestured to Ethan, "and he saved my life in more ways than one. Everything I have, everything I am, I owe to him and to this place and to all of you." There wasn't a dry eye in the house when she finished. In 1910, Daniel graduated from veterinary school and opened a practice in Jefferson. He didn't move back to the ranch, but he visited often and handled all the veterinary needs for their cattle. "I'm so proud of all of them," Violet said one evening. She and Ethan were alone on the porch, watching the sunset like they'd done thousands of times before. Samuel with the ranch, Emma with her family, Daniel with his practice. They've all turned out so well. "They had a good example to follow," Ethan said. "You were an amazing mother." "We were good parents together," Violet corrected. By 1912, they had 5 grandchildren. Emma's Lily and her new son, Robert. Samuel and Margaret's Ethan, Rose, and baby Samuel Jr. The house was always full of noise and activity when the grandchildren visited, and Ethan loved every minute of it. "Remember when it was just us and Rosa?" he said to Violet one particularly chaotic afternoon. Vaguely. She laughed as young Ethan ran past, chasing one of the barn cats. "But I wouldn't trade this for anything." In 1915, Ethan turned 60. He'd started slowing down, letting Samuel handle more of the ranch work, spending his afternoons in a rocking chair on the porch instead of out in the fields. "I'm getting old," he told Violet. "We both are." She settled into the chair next to him. "But we're getting old together. That's the important part." Rosa passed away peacefully in her sleep that winter. She was 82 and had been with the family for over 60 years. Her funeral was attended by half the county, and Ethan cried openly at the loss of the woman who had been like a mother to him after his own mother died. "She lived a good life," Violet said, holding his hand as they stood by Rosa's grave. "She was loved and she knew it." In 1918, the World War that had been raging in Europe finally ended. Daniel had wanted to enlist when America joined the war, but at 29 with a thriving veterinary practice, he'd been deemed more valuable at home. Still, they'd all lived in fear for those years, grateful their sons were safe but heartbroken for all the young men from Jefferson who hadn't come home. "I hate war," Violet said when news of the armistice came. "I hate what it does to people, to families. I know, but it's over now. We can focus on peace." The 1920s brought prosperity to the ranch and to the whole region. The cattle business was booming, and Samuel had expanded their operations to include some oil leases on the northern part of their property. The royalties from the oil added significantly to their income. "We're wealthy," Violet said in wonder, looking at their bank statements. "Actually wealthy." "Your business sense did that," Ethan said. "If you hadn't pushed me to expand back in 1880, we'd still be scraping by." By 1925, they had 10 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. Lily, Emma's oldest, had married young and already had 2 children of her own. The family gatherings were enormous now, requiring multiple tables set up in the yard. "Your grandfather would be so pleased," Violet said to Samuel at one such gathering. This is what he envisioned when he built this place. Ethan was 70 now, frail in a way that worried Violet. His heart had been giving him trouble and the doctor had warned him to take it easy. "I've never taken it easy in my life," Ethan protested. "I'm not about to start now." But he did slow down, spending most of his days in his chair on the porch, watching the life of the ranch go on around him. He loved watching the great-grandchildren play in the yard, loved hearing Violet's voice as she sang to the cattle, just like she had for 45 years. One warm evening in June 1926, Violet found him on the porch as usual, his eyes closed, a peaceful expression on his face. She knew immediately that he was gone. "Ethan." She touched his hand, found it still warm but lifeless. "Oh, my love." She sat down in the chair next to him, took his hand, and began to sing. It was the same hymn she'd been singing that day he found her, all those years ago. She sang until Samuel came looking for them, sang until the sun set over the land they'd built together. The funeral was enormous. It seemed like everyone in East Texas came to pay their respects to Ethan Emerson, the man who'd built one of the most successful ranches in the region, who'd raised 3 good children and helped raise countless grandchildren and great-grandchildren, who'd been known throughout the county for his fairness and kindness. Violet stood by his grave, flanked by her children and grandchildren, and felt the weight of 46 years of love and partnership settle over her. They'd had a good life together, better than she'd ever dreamed possible when she was lost and alone on the prairie. She lived another 12 years after Ethan's death, staying on at the ranch with Samuel and Margaret. She continued to sing to the cattle until she was too weak to walk out to the fields, and even then, she'd sit on the porch and let her voice carry across the land. "You still sing to them," Emma said during one visit. "They like it, and it makes me feel close to your father." Violet smiled. "He loved hearing me sing." Violet passed away quietly in her sleep in 1938 at the age of 80. She was buried next to Ethan under the oak trees, and at her funeral, all of her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren gathered to sing the hymn she'd sung to the cattle all those years. Samuel continued to run the ranch successfully for many more years, passing it on to his own son when he retired. The ranch remained in the family, growing and prospering, a testament to the love and hard work of the couple who'd built it together. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the cattle were settling down for the night, people swore they could hear a woman's voice singing across the prairie, soft and sweet, carried on the Texas wind. The cattle would stop and listen, peaceful and calm, just like they had that September day in 1879, when a lost woman named Violet Vaughn had stood among them and refused to panic, choosing instead to sing until she was found. The story of how Ethan Emerson found his wife singing to his cattle became family legend, passed down through the generations. Great-great-grandchildren would ask to hear the story of Granny Violet who got lost on the prairie, and they'd sit wide-eyed as they learned about how she'd survived for days by staying calm, about how she'd found the cattle and sang to them, about how their great-great-grandfather had fallen in love with her that very first day. And they lived happily ever after. The youngest ones would always ask. They did, would come the answer. They built a life together full of love and children and hard work and joy. And every day until she died, your Granny Violet sang to the cattle, just like she did that first day when she was lost but refused to panic. And the children would smile, satisfied with the ending, not knowing that the real story was so much richer and deeper than any fairy tale could capture. That it was a story of real love, the kind built over decades of shared work and shared joy, of raising children and building a legacy, of holding hands on the porch and watching the sunset over land they'd made their own through sheer determination and partnership. It was a story of a woman who got lost and found not just her way, but her home and her heart. Of a man who heard a voice singing and found the missing piece of himself he hadn't known he was searching for. Of two people who took a chance on love and built something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. And in the end, that was the true happily ever after, not the fairy tale kind that ends with a wedding, but the real kind that comes from a lifetime of choosing each other every single day until death parted them and even beyond. Their love living on in the land they'd tended, the children they'd raised, and the memory of a woman's voice singing to the cattle on a warm September evening in 1879.